When you live in a constant state of fascism, of which we are in Tennessee, it's easy to just be playing whack-a-mole. I call it whack-a-mole in Dante's 10th Circle of Hell. But I've really worked the last few years to, anytime I feel triggered to be reactive and respond to something, I always think, like, how does this build power? And how does this create capacity for others to lead in the next 10 years?
This is Women I Want You to Know. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Women I Want You to Know. I am absolutely ecstatic to be here today with Aftyn Behn. For those of you who don't know her, she's an incredible political powerhouse out of Tennessee, currently serving in the House of Representatives for the 51st District. She's been in this role since a special election in 2023. And I am thrilled to have her here today to talk to us more about the path into politics, what that means for women, and her agenda and what she's seeing happen both in the state of Tennessee and in the national political landscape. Aftyn, thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm deeply honored.
I know from what I've read that you have a master's in social work. You've done a lot of work at the grassroots level with the Tennessee Justice Center. You did work with Indivisible. You've been involved in ruralorganizing.com. So how did you go from those various activities to where you are now in the Tennessee Statehouse?
So I went to the University of Texas and thought I wanted to be a psychologist and work in labs the rest of my life, but that was not what my trajectory held. So my final year of graduate school for social work, and in social work, you can choose one of two arcs. You can choose to be a clinical social worker or one of a macro practitioner where you engage in advocacy and policy. And my final practicum, I had the opportunity to be placed at the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, Switzerland. And so I arrived at the apex of the refugee crisis, and that was a tumultuous year in global politics. Not only was it the Mediterranean refugee crisis, Brexit subsequently followed, and then the first election of President Trump. And what I quickly realized is I'm not trilingual, unfortunately, and I moved back to East Tennessee, much to the upset of my parents. Luckily, when I moved back, there was an organization. It's a public pro bono public interest law firm, but they had actually received advocacy dollars to expand Medicaid because those were the years trying to expand Medicaid following the passage under President Obama, and unsuccessfully. And so they had received money for advocacy to then fight in the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid congressional attacks from President Trump. And I ended up being hired as the first organizer, one of the first organizers for the Tennessee Justice Center. So I was out in rural Tennessee running around. What I'm notorious for, or shall I say infamous, is Representative Diane Black was chair of the House Finance Committee during Trump's first administration, and she proposed a budget that year that eliminated Pell Grants and SNAP, and really what unfortunately has been materialized in the one big ugly bill this last year. But she was chair of the House Finance Committee and lived in a 10,000 square foot chateau. So I decided to dress as a character called Marie Antoinette, but I dressed a full-fledged Marie Antoinette outfit and trolled her across Tennessee, showing up at political events. And in 2017, there was an lots of organic grassroots activity, including the proliferation of these Indivisible groups. And so National Indivisible wanted to engage in Tennessee's U.S. Senate race, which was against Marsha Blackburn and Phil Bredesen. And they came down to Tennessee, and because I had been providing information to these Indivisible groups about the Affordable Care Act and dressing up as the Grim Reaper and Marie Antoinette, the Indivisible groups put my name forth. And luckily I was hired by National Indivisible, which was the opportunity of a lifetime to hone my skill set. So I ended up being the statewide organizer for Tennessee, the statewide organizer for Kentucky as well, and then took on more responsibility managing the National Rural Program. And then in 2021, I left to become the political director for a national group called Rural Organizing, which engages in building rural progressive power, as well as passing rural progressive policies, and had the opportunity to participate in ballot referendums, such as in Montana and Ohio, to codify the access of abortion in their constitutions. And then all of this lands in 2023. And I joke that Tennessee politics is like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And I had I had wanted to wash my hands of the legislature up here because it was, as an organizer, I mean, Tennessee is, Margaret Applebaum wrote a piece entitled "Is Tennessee a Democracy?" And it's no longer. We've been an electoral autocracy for a decade. And I've been exhausted organizing at the legislature. And so I wanted to wash my hands of Tennessee politics and be done. Unfortunately, there was a school shooting at the end of in March of 2023, and there was a protest. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners followed the saga of the Tennessee Three in Nashville. And so I ended up taking a sabbatical from work for 12 days and helping to organize a lot of the protests and rallies outside the Capitol. And it was that moment I realized that I deserved to be up there just as much as anyone else. So I decided to run in 2023. And I really run for office because I am an organizer first, and I leverage my legislative positions to do the paradigm shifting work that I need to in a state like Tennessee. And to be quite frank, I've been more successful just in my 3 years as a legislator than I was as an organizer for a decade because of the proximity and access and platforms. And oftentimes when I get enraged, I decide to run for office. And so I became even more enraged last year, and decided to run for this congressional seat, knowing that it was the last nationalized special election in the entire country, and knowing that I was a candidate that was not going to sacrifice marginalized communities, such as our immigrant communities, at the altar of politics. And so I was grateful for the opportunity to run. Thank you for your support, and so many across the country that followed the race and were inspired. It was the most challenging experience of my life, and but I'm deeply honored that our race inspired so many across the country.
It really did. I mean, I have to say, I'm grateful to her bold move for putting you on my radar, and then to be able to watch your campaign and to see you fight so hard for your values and to stand up for so many constituents who cannot stand up for themselves. And I think your passion, your willingness to be, no holds barred, you go all in. I admire that and respect that so much. And unfortunately, I think it's very much what's necessary in the world we live in today, especially for many of the issues that you're fighting for. When I look at your, kind of policy agenda and the things that are important to you as a North Carolinian, I relate to a lot of it. I mean, healthcare, funding for our rural hospitals, looking at the rising cost of living. Can you talk about what you are seeing as kind of critical priorities? I know you're up for reelection this year for your statehouse seat. How are you approaching that? What's most critical to you and to your constituents right now?
I'm quite fortunate in that I have a very progressive district, and they elect me to the legislature understanding that I use my position to organize. I'm one of the few legislators in the country that has been uniquely trained to navigate authoritarianism, and I'm in the bed of it all here in Tennessee. And so my constituents really look to me for that long-term strategy and power building. They understand that I have the foresight to understand what is happening and what will happen, and how to build the infrastructure and capacity of others to take on the challenges that are ahead. So I'm incredibly fortunate that I'm not in a purple district having to fend off a Republican challenger every 2 years. But my legislative portfolio, in addition to kind of the long-term power building strategy of the state, contains messaging bills that are a direct contrast to the agenda that the Republican supermajority is offering. So our seminal bill with Senator Charlene Oliver, who also comes from the movement, she and I were both organizers for 10 years before we ran for office, is the ending Tennessee's grocery tax by closing corporate loopholes. Our second bill is expanding universal pre-K to all 95 counties by taxing big tech. And the other bill that I've been running is to address the infrastructure backlog by legalizing the recreational sale of marijuana, and called Pot for Potholes, which has been
Pot for potholes. Yes, I love that.
yeah. And this year we decided to film some campy commercials that are available on the website. But, my ethos in the legislature is if you don't laugh, you'll cry. And so I try to find as much joy in my organizing here as possible.
Well, there's also a lot of, I think, stickiness to the way you approach this. You simplify a lot of these issues in a way that are accessible to Main Street, which is really important, but you also do it in a way where it's memorable. And I think where a lot of your personality and your passion comes through. And I think that's so relatable. And people right now are craving leaders that they can relate to and where they can see, I think, dimensions of true humanity. And I think you bring so much of that to how you show up both in your current seat as well as when you ran last year. So I do think that resonates, and hopefully that will continue to propel you forward and the state of Tennessee with you.
There's a lot of kind of tense moments up here, and for me, at the end of the day, it's, sticking up for women and sticking up for those I love and those I know that work hard. But I do think it makes me a little more real. There was a conservative talk show host in Nashville, whose show sometimes I go on. And one time he said, you're a lot like Trump. I said, oh, okay. Please explain. He said, because you're authentic and people relate to that. They don't want kind of these kind of plastic in a box candidates anymore. And I'm sure you're seeing that more and more in your world.
Yeah, I think that that's very well said and very true. That authenticity is kind of a key part of what resonates. I also think, kind of going back to what you were saying about the key issues and the agenda and how you approach legislation, I know an area that has been near and dear to you, it's obviously one of the key platforms for her bold move, is around healthcare and around women's access to healthcare and reproductive rights. There's been a lot of activity in Tennessee of late around that. What are you sort of seeing the outlook be in Tennessee, which I think is really important for the rest of America? Like, what is happening and where is this going?
To provide some historical context, 15 years ago, the Republican supermajority has been reigning supreme for 15 years. And prior to that, we were able to, for a lot of this, the most egregious legislation behind the scenes, especially kind of behind the committees, before they would debut to the entire world. And that's not the reality anymore. And it's an amalgamation of factors. One, because we're an electoral autocracy, and maybe this issue is more endemic across the country, but the most kind of fringe candidates on the right are often the ones that are elected to the Tennessee legislature. A majority of our legislators are Christian nationalists, and they're out front and open about that. And then a framework that really helped me understand this moment in time was an article written by Naomi Klein, who wrote Disaster Capitalism, and Astra Taylor is one of the lead organizers of the Occupy movement. But they wrote an article in The Guardian, it's called End Times Fascism, and how the culminating project of the right now is to accelerate the end of the world to fulfill their biblical prophecy. And you can see that in the legislation here. And you'd mentioned before we started recording a bill filed this year, of course, during an election year, and of course by a legislator who needs, as I say, rabid red meat to run on, to criminally charge women with homicide should they get abortions. But over the past 10 years, it's been a slow kind of descent into the abyss, and we've just seen more erosion of our bodily autonomy and civil liberties in a way that, which also culminated in a bill they tried to, in which they were testing the parameters of our First Amendment right to talk about abortion. They called it the abortion trafficking bill. One of the stipulations in the bill, the provision said you can't recruit people. And so what the far right was trying to do was use the word recruit to test the confines of what
Yeah.
First Amendment speech is palatable for a supermajority. We filed a lawsuit in the conservative Sixth Circuit federal court, and we actually won. And we've been winning against our kind of far right attorney general. But the ecosystem right now is pretty sad. I mean, organizationally, we only have a few organizations that have lasted, persisted. I mean, we have a Planned Parenthood. I'm on the steering committee for our Reproductive org, but we do a lot with a little. And then in terms of legislation, it just continues to dehumanize women. Another bill, I often filed the North Star. We call it the South Star because we're in the South, but the South Star abortion bill. And just to give your listeners an idea of how terrible our abortion ban is, it repeals 19 laws. So, and this year in particular, I filed a bill along with Planned Parenthood to ensure that pregnant women cannot be discriminated against from their healthcare providers, because there was a case of a woman who was with her partner for 9 years, but unmarried, was pregnant with her second child, went to a physician in upper Northeast Tennessee, and he explicitly told her, "I'm not going to provide you care because you're unmarried, and that is against my moral beliefs." So it's just, yeah, it's very bleak here, and unfortunately, I don't see, there's light at the end of the tunnel, but it's still quite far.
And how does that impact the dynamic for OBGYNs? I mean, do people want to practice in Tennessee? Is this like a real deterrent? I can imagine that for some, it's a very concerning situation as a doctor.
60% of our healthcare facilities in the state of Tennessee have no obstetrician care. We have the highest maternal mortality rate in the country. And the Tennessee legislature is spending their resources to create a monument to the unborn this year outside the Capitol building. They don't want to address the real tangible crises, because if they acknowledged that pregnant women were dying in mass, it would be a mass attack on their, I guess, on their narrative that they've been promulgating the past decade. But yeah, it's very dire here. I'm really interested right now in this moment of authoritarianism, of how do we drive a wedge in their coalition and bring more people to our side. Public polling in Tennessee shows that abortion access with some restrictions is extremely popular, and that's been perennially corroborated by these polls. But I think kind of a rupture that I'm looking for is the prosecution of miscarriage and pregnancy in Tennessee. So, we've passed all this like frothing me legislation, but no district attorney has decided to prosecute. And I think when that happens, that is where my organizing kind of eyes and capacity will be. I will devote to that effort, because especially if it happens in a rural community, that's an opportunity for us to get out there and explain to the community members just how punitive our policies are, and how people, and provide people the kind of on-ramp to our coalition rather than theirs.
I often participate in conversations where people talk a lot about the importance of looking at the South, and especially red states in the South and red districts in the South, because in many ways, where go those districts and states potentially go the US, especially in the current administration. What do you think are some key things people beyond Tennessee have to be focused on that are happening in the South that could be early warning indicators of expansive efforts?
Last year, I mean, I'm really struggling, I think, this year with chronic burnout, and depression, and just kind of the general state of the world. But in that, I often look to the civil rights movement. And so I've been rewatching the documentary series Eyes on the Prize that captures the civil rights movement. I highly recommend it to your listeners. In that, what I had forgotten about is that the civil rights organizers, activists, legislators, and movement attorneys leveraged Southern legislation to use the judicial and litigative processes to organize around, right? So they decided who was going to break laws, where, when, and then organized around that to fixate the attention on the South in order to move a national narrative forward that there needed to be federal intervention. And of course, we know how that ended.
Yeah.
So one is that the South is, this is, as you, I think you intimated, and you paraphrased quite well, which is a quote from W.E. Du Bois, that as goes the South, so goes the nation. And it's absolutely true. And I do think that the pendulum will swing here. It will. And I'm seeing fractures in their coalition. The way that they're governing is ineffective. And it's going to render, it will yield an era of austerity that will destroy the state. And in that is the crises that I can, pick up and organize around. But for your general audience nationally, the fights are here. The legislation they're filing in Tennessee, they have no their entire political agenda is filing unconstitutional bills in our legislature so that they make their way through the Sixth Circuit to end up at the Supreme Court to undo your, whatever state you live in, your federally protected constitutional rights. So you have to invest in places and organizers like me in the South, because this is where the line is drawn. And unfortunately, if you don't invest now, that this is going to end up on your doorstep next. But I do believe that the pendulum will swing here, and it will swing hard.
Well, and I want to pick up on something else you just said, which is around kind of the chaos and sort of this heightened level of activity everywhere and all the distractions. And, I think for women in particular, we feel it acutely. You talked about that feeling of burnt out. And I think even if we're not in public office, we're all feeling burnt out, overwhelmed. What is your advice, especially for women, given all of this chaos and urgency? How do we focus our efforts? How can we be grassroots organizers? How can we have an impact?
For those that, have never been involved in politics, and I'm always kind of like voluntelling people, especially in my Substack, that like they need to get off the sidelines. Even if you don't know how to organize, you have to get your hands dirty. And even just starting locally, I think the best antidote to authoritarianism is localization and local connectivity and resistance. And so the more connected you are to your neighbors, the more, and I think Minneapolis is an excellent case study of all of this, in which you had, white moms standing outside in 70 below weather outside these primary schools for 16 hours a day, engaged in school watch. That is the type of, I was going to say leadership, but it is leadership, but like gumption we need right now, especially from people who may not feel like they know all the things, and that's fine. Anyone starting out never knew any of the things. But for me, I always tried to find the smartest people in the room and learn from them. And so I've been very grateful to have, terrific mentors. And then, for the long haul, like you've got to find your cadre. For me, the organizers in Tennessee, I think, are some of the best in the country, just because we have to operate under oppressive circumstances. But what's really beautiful about this moment is we've all organized together for a decade, and now we've kind of assumed leadership positions in which we're able to, move programmatic and or defeat kind of larger projects of the far right together, because we are in these positions. So I think finding your people, and one of my favorite organizers is Adrienne Marie Brown, and she wrote a book called Emergent Strategies, and I highly recommend for anyone. She has all these kind of, I guess they're mantras that she lives by. Move at the speed of trust, and that there's always time to do the right work. And I think about those two a lot, especially in this moment, because there's always going to be a sense of urgency. And three, for me, the past few years has been an exercise in retreating from reaction and building the kind of muscle to be proactive. And what I mean by that is, like, when you live in a constant state of fascism, of which we are in Tennessee, it's easy to just be playing whack-a-mole. I call it whack-a-mole in Dante's 10th Circle of Hell. But I've really worked the last few years to, anytime I'm about to be, I feel triggered to be reactive and respond to something, I always think, like, how does this build power, and how does this create capacity for others to lead in the next 10 years? And if it can't answer those questions, then I kind of retreat, and if it doesn't fall into that kind of larger plan. And so I'd really challenge people who are feeling overstimulated to choose a lane and figure out how you can build from it.
That's excellent advice, because I think when we can pick a lane and focus there, somehow it feels more attainable and controllable. So I really like that. One other question I have for you is really, you've grown so much in your political leadership and the way you are now bringing Tennessee forward, the way you showed up to try to advance things on the national stage last year. So if you reflect back, growth, in my opinion, forces us to really outgrow old beliefs, much of it about ourselves. So when you look back, what's one belief that you had to let go of in order to lead at this level?
I hate to say this, but I don't know how to not say it, but, running for that seat was one of the most miserable experiences of my life. And I'm embarrassed because I think I was naive and not understanding just how bad it was going to be because of the money spent, getting hissed at in public. My family was stalked. It was so unpleasant. I had violent rape threats called into my office every day. It was it was miserable.
Brutal. I mean, it's
Yeah.
disgusting. I
Yeah,
can't.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I've been asked to, talk to women and like rally them to run for office. And in Tennessee, we have, lots of people running for office because they were inspired by my race, but it's also like I'm a pragmatist. And so I can't kind of negate the horrors that exist. But you grow thick skin. And especially this year, I feel like I've finally stepped into this realm of being really confident in my and I'm sorry, I don't know if I can cuss, but like my fuck it all attitude. And I that feels really comfortable for me in this moment in time. I think after shedding the kind of chaos and upset from the congressional race, that I'm stepping into this space where I feel more confident in my leadership and know that it is going to be a road less traveled. But there's so many people behind me, and that's what organizing does. And so for people listening that want to run for office, I'd say, start organizing because you build a base of people that have your back. And I think that's been evident this week is that even though I launched us into some expletives, that there is a group of especially women who understand what I'm going through and have my back. And, I'm always on the side of really powerful bold women who have a lot to say. So I do think it made me more confident in my leadership abilities and understanding that I'm uniquely prepared for this moment and that this is what leadership looks like, as tough as it's going to be.
Well, I couldn't agree more that this is what leadership looks like. And I think that being bold and confident is really important, not only in politics, but for women in business and in every facet of life. So I'm grateful to you that you ran last year. It's a joy now to watch you and see you continuing to advocate for issues that matter to so many of us and to really represent your constituents in Tennessee. I hope you will keep going because we need you out there. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to convey to our audience?
Well, once again, I want to say thank you. I think what's really challenging for me in this moment, and I know you can attest to this, is just I know you remember in 2018 when there was just so much frenetic excitement about women running for office and the mass kind of wave of young women who stepped into politics like me, in an organizing capacity, and to see that dissolve into just raw misogyny at every level is really hard to digest. And I'm like I've been like old school misogyny is back. Like old school
Oh, and
racism.
it's not behind closed doors anymore either. It's like right out and open. Yeah.
Well, especially from Democratic men. It makes me incredibly sad that now, we're seeing less and less women run for office because of the political horrors of the reality of running for office. And so, I guess my question is for you, like, where do you see the ecosystem kind of, I guess, being refilled and how and because it seems like a lot of especially the organizational infrastructure is just not as robust as it once was, and I don't know what the next iteration looks like.
I think it's a really fair question. I mean, I have found over the last couple of years, I'm focusing more and more down ballot and really looking at things that are happening at the county commissioner level, what's happening in kind of local politics. Because if we can build the bench of women who want to continue to go up ballot. I think that's going to be really important moving forward. And I think getting that training of what candidacy and campaigning looks like at the local level and having organizations like Her Bold Move, which are really willing to support candidates and meet them where they are and give them the insight and the expertise to navigate what's a very complex environment and a lot of people who don't have their best interests at heart. That's what gets me excited. Last year, when we saw the governorships change hands the way they did, and we did see some big city mayoral elections go the way that they did, that brings me a lot of excitement and energy. So as dark as some of these days have been, I try to stay anchored in that. I also have a daughter who just graduated college. And I look at she and her peers and I think these girls got it. They understand, they get it. And that the sheer energy and passion they have to not let anything stand in their way and not to listen to the negative comments and to the misogyny. Like they're all about the patriarchy is over. Like it's, the next chapter for women. And I love that. And I just want to see that continue.
I resonate with that as I'm surrounded by Gen Z women, and they definitely fill my cup because I feel much more of a curmudgeon, like an older millennial grandma. And they're just so excited to learn and to be organizing. And I think anyone's greatest legacy is the people that you've built and you've created the ladder for behind you. And so I'm hoping that, and I do think that I guess the joy with all of this is that I do believe in my heart of hearts that there will be another moment of transformative change like we saw with the New Deal, when, the gerontocracy is gone and Gen Z steps in to fill these leadership roles and assumes positions within state and local and federal government. I do think that we'll see hopefully transformative change before Gen Alpha blows it up. But yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I cannot thank you enough for making time to be with us today. What can we do to support you? I mean, I know you have a great constituency who has your back, but what can we be doing to support you? You mentioned your Substack.
My Substack is where I read and write. I think I will be launching a more basically a paid Substack to sustain my organizing, which is probably the best investment that most people can make in the South. And so looking forward to launching that. But yeah, my Substack is where I read and write. And my last post was entitled, "How Do I Live, Laugh, Legislate Under Fascism?" Yes. Of which the Republican supermajority was not happy. They blacklisted me from many procedures in the House, but it was worth it because, and for those of you who may or may not read it, it's important because all it provides is a chronology of history and where we are in this moment. And if that is scary to you, then you're on the wrong side of it. So reading my Substack. And then I just want to say thank you to you and all of your listeners who supported the race. I felt like the country had my back. And that is an incredibly good feeling. And I will run for higher office. For me, it's building. I need to build the coalition. I need to win a statewide race, which is going to be another few years in Tennessee. But I believe it can be done. And I look forward to that moment.
Well, we will be here to support you. So I look forward to continuing to see your journey. And yes, I can't wait to check out the new Substack that you'll be launching. So please keep us posted. And thank you again. Good luck with everything. I know there is a lot going on. And just know that we are all so thankful for you and for your leadership. And we will continue to support you in any way that we can.
Thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here today and sharing in this inspiring story from women I want you to know. Please leave a review and share this episode with another woman in your life. And please join the conversation and connect with us on LinkedIn and Instagram and keep fueling the future for female founders and leaders.